Welcome back. Welcome back. We got to do 3 videos a day. So I'm going to do 2 books and then I'm going to go live on other topics. I just got off work. It is raining and it's so dreary. So we're going to do chapter 2 on our 48 laws of power. Hopefully, this is really a good book. It gives me a lot to think about and some tools. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. That's powerful in itself. Be wary of friends. They will betray you more quickly, for they are easily aroused by envy. That is a fact. That's family and friends. They also become spoiled and tyrannical. But hire a former enemy and he will be more loyal than a friend. Wow. Because he has more to prove. In fact, you have more to fear from friends than from enemies. If you have no enemies, find a way to make them. Now, I ain't trying to make no enemies, so I totally disagree with that. In the mid-9th century, a young man named Michael III assumed the throne of Byzantine Empire. His mother, the Empress Theodora, had been banished to the nunnery, and her lover, Theocrates, had been murdered. At the head of the conspiracy to depose Theodora and enthrone Michael had been Michael's uncle, Bardas, a man of intelligence and ambition. Michael was now a young, inexperienced ruler surrounded by intriguers, murderers, and profligates. In this time of prayer, he needed someone he could trust as his counselor, and his thought turned to Basil, his best friend. Basilius had no experience whatsoever in government and politics. In fact, he was the head of the royal stables, but he had proven his love and gratitude time and time again. They had met a few years before when Michael had been visiting the stables just as a wild horse got loose. Basilius, a young groom from peasant Macedonian stock, had saved Michael's life. The groom's strength and courage had impressed Michael, who immediately raised Basilius from the obscurity of being a horse trainer to the position of head of the stables. He loaded his friend with gifts and favors, and they became inseparable. Basilius was sent to the finest school in Byzantium, and the crude peasant became a cultured, sophisticated courier. Now, Michael was an emperor and in need of someone loyal. Who could be better trusted in the post of chamberlain, and the crude peasant became a cultured, sophisticated courier. Now, Michael was emperor and in need of someone loyal. Who could he better trust in the post of chamberlain and chief counselor than a young man who owed him everything? Basilius could be trained for the job, and Michael loved him like a brother. Ignoring the advice of those who recommended the much more qualified Bardas, Michael chose his friend. Basilius learned well and soon advised the emperor on all matters of the state. The only problem seemed to be money. Basilius never had enough. Exposure to the splendor of the Byzantine court life made him want perks of power. Michael doubled and tripled his salary, ennobled him, and married him off to his own mistress, Eudoxia Ingronita. Keeping such a trusted friend and advisor satisfied was worth any price, but more trouble was to come. Bardas was now head of the army, and Basilius convinced Michael that the man was hopelessly ambitious. Under the illusion he could control his nephew, Bardas had conspired to put him on the throne, and he could conspire again, this time to get rid of Michael and assume the crown himself. Basilius poured poison into Michael's ear until the emperor agreed to have his uncle murdered. Wow. During a great horse race, Basileus closed in on Bardas in a crowd and stabbed him to death. Soon after, Basileus asked that he replace Bardas as head of the army, where he could keep control of the ring and quell rebellion. This was granted. Now, Basileus' power and wealth only grew, and a few years later, Michael, in financial straits from his extravagance, asked him to pay back some of the money he had borrowed over the years. To Michael's shock and astonishment, Basileus refused with a look of such impudence that the emperor suddenly realized his predicament. The poor stable boy had more money, more allies in the army and senate, and in the end, more power than the emperor himself. Wow. A few weeks later, after a night of heavy drinking, Michael woke to find himself surrounded by soldiers. Basileus watched as they stabbed the emperor to death. Then, after proclaiming himself emperor, he rode his horse through the streets of Bassanine, banishing the head of his former benefactor and best friend at the end of his long pike. Wow. You talking about stabbing somebody in the back. Michael III staked his future on a sense of gratitude. He thought Basileus must feel for him. Surely Basileus would serve him best. He owed the emperor his wealth, his education, and his position. Then once Basileus was in power, anything he needed, it was best to give him, strengthening the bonds between the two men. It was only on the fatal day when the emperor saw the imprudent smile on Basileus' face that he realized his deadly mistake. He had created a monster. Damn. Wow. He had allowed a man to see power up close, a man who then wanted more, who asked for anything and got it, who felt incumbent by the charity he had received and simply did what many people do in such situation. They forget the favors they have received and imagine they have earned their success by their own merits. At Michael's moment of realization, he could still have saved his life, but friendship and love blind every man to their interests. Nobody believes a friend can betray, and Michael went on disbelieving this until the day his head ended up on a pike. That's deep. Wow, and people do this to friends every day. For several centuries after the fall of the Han Dynasty, Chinese history followed the same pattern of violent, bloody coups, one after the other. Army men would plot to kill a weak emperor, then would replace him on the dragon throne with a strong general. The general would start a new dynasty and crown himself emperor. To ensure his own survival, he would kill off his fellow generals. A few years later, however, the pattern would resume. New general would rise up, assassinate him or his sons in their turn. To be emperor, China was to be alone, surrounded by a pack of enemies. It was the least powerful, least secure position in the realm. In 959, General Cho Chun became Emperor Song. He knew the odds, the probability that within a year or two he would be murdered. How could he break the pattern? Soon after becoming emperor, Song ordered a banquet to celebrate the new dynasty and invited the most powerful commanders in the army. After they drank much wine, he dismissed the guards and everybody except the generals, who now feared he would murder them in one fell swoop. Instead, he addressed them. The whole day is spent in fear, and I am happy both at the table and in my bed. For which one of you does not dream of ascending the throne? I do not doubt your allegiance, but if by some chance your subordinates seeking wealth and position were to force the emperor's yellow robe upon you in turn, how could you refuse it? Drunk and fearing for their lives, the generals proclaimed their innocence and their loyalty, but some had other ideas. The best way to pass one's day is in peaceful enjoyment of riches and honor. If you are willing to give up your commands, I am ready to provide you with fine estates and beautiful dwellings where you may take your pleasure with singers and girls as your companions. The astonished generals realized that indeed of life of anxiety and struggle, Sun was offering them riches and security. The next day, all of the generals tendered their resignations and they retired as nobles to the estates that Sun bestowed on them. That was a smart move. In one stroke, Sun turned a pack of friendly wolves who would likely have betrayed him into a group of docile lambs far from all power. Over the next year, Sun continued his campaign to secure his rule. In 971, King Lu of the Southern Han finally surrendered to him after years of rebellion. To Lu's astonishment, Sun gave him a rank in the imperial court and invited him to the palace to seal their newfound friendship with wine. As King Lu took the glass that Sun offered him, he hesitated, fearing it contained poison. Your subject's crime certainly merit death, he cried out, but I beg your majesty to spare your subject's life. Indeed, I dare not drink this wine. Emperor Sun laughed, took the glass from him, and swallowed it himself. There was no poison. From then on, Lu became his most trusted and loyal friend. Who was his enemy? Wow. At the time, China had splintered into many smaller kingdoms. When Qin Su, the king of one of these, was defeated, Sun's minister advised the emperor to lock his rebel up. They presented documents proving he was still conspiring to kill Sun. When Shan Shu came to visit the emperor, however, instead of locking him up, Sun honored him. He also gave him a package, which he told the former king to open when he was halfway home. Qin Su opened the bundle on his return journey and saw that it contained all the papers documenting his conspiracy. He realized that the son knew of his murderous plans, yet had spared him nonetheless. That this generosity won him over, and he too became one of Sun's most loyal vessels. Wow, that gave me a lot to think about. A Chinese proverb compares friends to jaws and teeth of a dangerous animal. If you are not careful, you will find them chewing you up. That is a fact. Emperor Sun knew the jaws he was passing between when he assumed the throne. His friends in the army would chew him up like meat, and if he somehow survived, his friends in government would have him for supper. Emperor Sun would have no truck with friends. He bribed his fellow generals with splendid estates and kept them far away. This was a much better way to emasculate them than killing them, which will only have had other generals seek vengeance. And Sun would have nothing to do with friendly ministers. More often than not, they would end up drinking his famous cup of poison wine. Instead of relying on friends, Sun used his enemies, one after the other, transforming them into more reliable subjects. While a friend expects more and more favors and sees with jealousy, these former enemies expected nothing and got everything. Damn, that's deep. A man suddenly spared the guillotine is a grateful man indeed, and will go to the ends of the earth for the man who has pardoned him. Wow. Wow. In time, these former enemies became Sun's most trusted friends, and Sun was finally able to break the pattern of coups, violence, and civil war. The Sun dynasty ruled China for more than 300 years. Wow. Keys to power. Let me see how long this is. Oh, okay. It is natural to want to employ your friends when you find yourself in times of need. The world is a harsh place, and your friends soften the harshness. Besides, you know them. Why depend on a stranger when you have a friend at hand? The problem is that you do not know your friends as well as you imagine. Friends often agree on things in order to avoid an argument. They cover up their unpleasant qualities so as to not offend each other. They laugh extra hard at each other's jokes. Since honesty rather strengthens friendship, you may never know your friend truly feels. Friends will say that they love your poetry, adore your music, envy your taste in clothes, and maybe they mean it. Often they do not. When you decide to hire a friend, you gradually discover the qualities he or she kept hidden. Strangely enough, it is your act of kindness that unbalances everything. People want to feel they deserve their good fortune. The recipe of a favor can become oppressive. It means you have been chosen because you are a friend, not necessarily because you are deserving. There is almost a touch of condescension in the act of hiring friends that secretly afflicts them. Damn. The injury will come out slowly, a little more honestly, flashes of resentment and envy here and there, and before you know it, your friendship fades. The more favors and gifts you supply to revive the friendship, the less gratitude you receive. Ingratitude has a long, deep history. It is demonstrated in its powers for so many centuries that it truly amazes the people continue to underestimate them. Better to be weary. If you never expect gratitude from a friend, you will be pleasantly surprised when they do not prove grateful. Wow. The problem with using or hiring friends is that it will inevitably limit your power. The friend is rarely the one who most able to help you, and in the end, skill and competence are far more important than friendly feelings. All working situations require a kind of distance between people. You are trying to work, not make friends. Friendliness, real or false, only obscures that fact. The key to power then is the ability to judge who is best able to further your interest in a situation. Keep friends for friendship, but work with skilled and competent people. Your enemies, on the other hand, are an untapped gold mine that you must learn to exploit. Talleyrand, Napoleon's foreign minister, decided in 1807 that his boss was leading France to ruin, and the time had come to turn against him. He understood the dangers of conspiring against the emperor. He needed a partner, a confidant, and what friend could he trust in such a project? He chose Joseph Fouché, head of the secret police, his most hated enemy, a man who had even tried to have him assassinated. He knew that their former hatred would create an opportunity for an emotional reconciliation. He knew that Fauci would expect nothing from him, and in fact would work to prove he was worthy of Talleyrand's choice. A person who has something to prove will move mountains for you. Damn. Finally, he knew that his friendship with Fauci would be based on mutual self-interest and would not be contaminated by personal feeling. The selection proved perfect. Although the conspirators did not succeed in toppling Napoleon, the union of such powerful but unlikely partners generated much interest in the cause. Opposition to the emperor slowly began to spread, and from then on, Talleyrand and Fauci had a fruitful working relationship. Whenever you can, bury the hatchet with an enemy and make a point of putting them in your service. As Lincoln said, you destroy an enemy when you make a friend of him. In 1971, during the Vietnam War, Henry Kissinger was the target of unsuccessful kidnapping attempt, a conspiracy involving the renowned anti-war activists, the Berrigan brothers, 4 more Catholic priests, and 4 nuns. In private, without informing the Secret Service or the Justice Department, Kissinger arranged a Saturday morning meeting with 3 of the alleged kidnappers, explaining to this guest that he would have most American soldiers out of Vietnam by 1972. That was a lie. He completely charmed them. They gave him the kidnapped Kissinger buttons and one of them remained a friend of his for years, visiting him on several occasions. This was not just a one-time ploy. Kissinger made a policy of working with those who disagreed with him. Colleagues comment that he seemed to get along better with his enemies than his friends. Without enemies around us, we grow lazy. An enemy at our heels sharpens our wits. It sure do. Keeping us focused and alert is sometimes better than to use enemies, rather than transform them into friends or allies. Ma Shantung saw conflict as key in his approach to power. In 1937, the Japanese invaded China. Fearing that the Japanese would wipe them out, some communist leaders advocated leaving the nationalists to fight the Japanese and using time to recuperate. Mao disagreed. The Chinese could not possibly defeat and occupy a vast country like China for long. Once they left, the communists would have grown rusty if they had been out of combat for several years and would be ill-prepared to reopen their struggle with the nationalists. To fight a formidable foe like Japanese, in fact, would be the perfect training for the communist army. Mao's plan was adopted and it worked. By the time the Japanese finally retreated, the communists had gained a fighting experience that helped them defeat the nationalists. Years later, a Japanese visitor tried to apologize to Mao for his country's invasion of China. Mao interrupted. "Should I not thank you instead?" Without a worthy opponent, he explained, a man or group cannot grow stronger. Mao's strategy, a constant conflict, has several key components. First, be certain that in the long run you will emerge victorious. Never pick a fight with someone you are not sure you can defeat, as Mao knew the Japanese would be defeated in time. Second, if you have no apparent enemies, you must sometimes set up a convenient target, even turning a friend into an enemy. Wow. Mao used this tactic time and time again in politics. Third, use such enemies to define your cause more clearly to the public, even framing it as a struggle of good against evil. Mao actually encouraged China disagreements with the Soviet Union and the United States. Without clear-cut enemies, he believed his people would lose any sense of what Chinese communism meant. A sharply defined enemy is far more stronger argument for your side than all the words you could possibly put together. Never let the presence upset you, or never let the presence of enemies upset or distress you. You are far better off with a declared opponent or two than not knowing where your real enemies lie. That's a fact. The man of power welcomes conflict, using enemies to enhance his reputation as a sugar-footed fighter who can be relied upon in the times of uncertainty. Although it's generally best not to mix work with friendship, there are times when a friend can be used to greater effort than an enemy. A man of power, for example, often has dirty work that has to be done, but for the sake of appearance, it is generally preferable to have other people do it for him. Friends often do their best, since their affection for him makes them willing to take chances. Also, if your plans go awry for some reason, you can use a friend as a convenient scapegoat. This fall of favor was a trick often used by kings and sovereigns. They would let their closest friend at court take the fall for the mistake, since the public would not believe that they would deliberately sacrifice a friend for such a purpose. Of course, after you play that card, you have lost your friend forever. It is best then to reserve the scapegoat role for someone who is close to you, but not too close. Finally, the problem about working with friends is that it confuses the boundaries and distances the working requires. That's true. But if both partners in the arrangement understand the dangers involved, a friend often can be employed to great effect. You must never let your guard down in such a venture. However, always be on the lookout for any signs of emotional disturbance, such as envy and ingratitude. Nothing is stable in the realm of power. Even the closest friends can be transformed into the worst of enemies. Dang, that was good. That was good. That's chapter 2. All right, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. Love y'all.